Welcome back to the season finale of The Mandalorian Season 3. We highly recommend watching episode 8 before proceeding with this video, but if you're all caught up, let's dive right in. Now, we know we'd said we'd be back on Thursday with a video about Jetpack Combat, but it took us a little longer than expected. As promised, today though, we'll be talking about the epic moments seen in the season finale, and namely, that incredibly cool jetpack fight scene between the Mandalorians and Imperial troopers. That scene was one of the best parts of the episode for us, not including the incredibly emotional epilogue, but it wasn't the first we've ever seen of its kind. In fact, Jetpack Combat has been featured multiple times on other Star Wars media, and today, we'll be taking a look at what's involved in jetpack warfare. Jetpacks were devices for single-person aerial transportation that were worn strapped to one's back. They were commonly used among Mandalorians, but other factions also commonly used them, like bounty hunters, certain clone units in the GAR, Imperial drum troopers, and others. There were several models, but in general, they worked the same way. An intake pulled air into an ignition chamber where miniature turbines pumped in fuel to create the flame. These bursts of flame were controlled by internal regulators. Given the limited amount of fuel a jetpack could hold and how hot ignition could get, they could only function for so long before either running out of fuel or overheating. Another limitation to their use was that they could only be deployed within a planetary atmosphere, since they couldn't operate in zero, low, or high pressure. There was a significant difference between jetpacks and rocket packs. Jetpacks were generally quieter and lighter, and also less dangerous to use in combat thanks to the smaller quantity of explosive fuel they carried. In exchange for the incredible maneuverability they gave their users, jetpacks were somewhat of a gamble with death. When flying through the air, jetpack users were often sitting ducks. If the enemy didn't kill them, their jetpack overheating or running out of fuel without them realizing could send them plummeting to their deaths. Even if they kept an eye on that, they weren't safe, as the jetpack could fail if the intake pumped in dust, debris, or other minute particles that could clog the turbines up. And even if none of that happened, they could always experience what was fondly referred to as explosive failure, which was a term describing the entire fuel tank igniting and going kaboom with the user still attached to it. Despite all these horrific dangers, people still use jetpacks frequently, with some, like the Mandalorians who called their use the art of the rising phoenix, relying on them heavily. That's because, despite the not insignificant chances of a painful death, Jetpack Combat was both badass and effective. We've already mentioned that multiple different factions relied on jetpacks throughout the centuries, but they all used them the same way, more or less. Bounty hunters such as Boba and Jango Fett used their jetpacks to maneuver around obstacles and catch up to their prey. It was also an escape tool they could rely on to get out of sticky situations. Overall, the jetpacks made them faster and more maneuverable, so anything they were running after or from stood much less of a chance. Clones in the GAR also frequently deployed jetpacks. Commonly, they were used so clone troopers could jump out of LAATs and descend to unfriendly territory safely without the vehicle needing to land, just as we saw when Captain Rex and his unit descended on Mandalore in Season 7 of the Clone Wars. Clone Commandos and the 2nd Airborne Company also employed jetpacks for this reason. Another excellent use of jetpacks demonstrated by the 501st was during the final season of the Clone Wars. In Season 7, Episode 9, Anakin and his troopers came to Obi-Wan and Cody's aid when the latter were outnumbered by a vast army of droids. Anakin pretended to surrender, luring the droids in, only for Captain Rex and his troops to come swooping up from under the bridge where they'd been hiding. The clones were using jetpacks to fly up and take out vast swaths of droids with explosives and laser fire, even taking down the Octup Tara Tri-droids. Skywalker's plan would have never succeeded had the clones not used their jetpacks to not only successfully set up an ambush, but also gain the high ground, a lesson Anakin would later wish he'd taken to heart. During the time of the Empire, Imperial jump troopers relied on jetpacks to oppress citizens, and the First Order followed their example. Even the Rebel Alliance had their own jetpack troopers. Dark Troopers, Blaze Troopers, Wookiees, and many more relied on the jetpack's maneuverability to inflict more damage and gain the upper hand in combat. And, of course, Mandalorians had a whole thing going on with them. For Mandalorians, Jetpacks weren't just a tool to be used, but part of their culture. This has remained consistent throughout every show, from Jango Fett's appearances in the prequels, to the Mandalorians in the Clone Wars, to the Children of the Watch and Bo-Katan's people in The Mandalorian. We even got a good look at them in Rebels. The moment a Mandalorian was old enough to learn to control a jetpack, they were taught how to use one. They were especially helpful for their specific fighting style, as they would descend from above in a hail of blaster fire to take out their enemies before they even had a chance to resist. In instances where they wanted to ambush a convoy, jetpacks let them use terrain to their advantage, and also to keep up with moving vehicles, just like when Sabine Wren and Ezra rescued her father in Rebels. All of that brings us to this week's episode, Massive Airborne Jetpack Combat. Let's take a look at the pros and cons. Needless to say, seeing the Mandalorians and Imperial Jump Troopers going at each other in the air was beyond epic. However, it's not something we commonly see. Strapping a jetpack to an organic makes that organic go very fast. It's one thing when one side has all the jetpacks and the other is on the ground, which is what we usually get, but in this episode, both sides were simultaneously airborne. This is as epic as it is difficult. Instead of thinking about it as ground combat, the best way of viewing it is as mini starfighter combat, sort of. With the exception of the armorer and her melee weapons and Bo-Katan with her darksaber, everyone else relied on ranged weapons. The maneuvers they employed were also very reminiscent of starfighter duels, such as shorting out your engine so the enemies pursuing you would fly ahead of you where you could effectively shoot them down. Similar to the chaos of an open space battle, people took on whoever they could see. Allies teamed up against enemies or covered each other's backs. Unlike ground fights, everything happened so incredibly fast. The main difference with the starfighter duel, of course, is that the jetpack users were able to use their surroundings to their advantage, such as when Bo-Katan slid along a metal platform, then dropped off the edge so she could reposition and take out her pursuers. As chaotic as it might have been, we honestly believe few other people could have ever handled this high-level combat. Jetpacks are very powerful, extremely volatile pieces of equipment, and many people simply didn't get nearly enough practice. If we'd put the 5-0 first in this situation, for example, we can't say for certain that they would have performed as well, since they weren't mainly trained to use jetpacks. The Mandalorians, on the other hand, were raised with them. If any one group in the galaxy could pull this sort of aerial battle off, it was them, which is backed up by how easily they took the Imperial Jump Troopers out. As for the Imps, it makes sense that, given Mandalore's broken terrain, Jump Troopers were the obvious choice to ambush the Mandalorians. The Empire was well known for having brutal training regimes, but it's somewhat unlikely that jetpack on jetpack combat was a priority. The Mandalorians, on the other hand, had plenty of experience fighting each other. That's why, at the end of the day, they came out on top, with few to no casualties from what we could tell. Perhaps in future, the Empire should rethink using a faction's signature weapon to fight them head on. And with that, we've reached the end of our weekly commentary on Din Djarin, Din Grogu, and the Mandalorian struggle. Hopefully you enjoyed the season, and we look forward to revisiting some of these topics in future videos. And tell us, what about you? What are your closing thoughts on this season? Were you happy with it, or are you jumping on the hate train? Let us know your thoughts in the comments section below, and we'll see you soon for Season 4.